he's gay, but he has a special connection to classical music. There's many things that are interesting about him.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, to another video on the channel. Before we get into it, a lot of you watch my content and keep coming back, but are still not subscribed. If that's you, consider subscribing, as it's just one button and it helps out the channel a lot. And you're coming back anyway. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Fantasy is the most popular form of escapism for a lot of people, and in gaming this is no different. Think of Dark Souls, The Witcher, Skyrim, and Dragon's Dogma. These games allow you to explore an unknown world, uncover secrets, and unearth new relics to use. Because fantasy, at least in these older games, is basically the last form of escapism left. And I don't mean in the shallow, turn your brain off for 20 minutes and mow down goblins way. I mean real escape, the kind where you are stepping into something completely unfamiliar, something that doesn't exist in your lackluster day-to-day life. That's the core of it. There are no unknown lands in real life anymore, so fantasy games step in and fill that gap. They're one of the last places where you can actually feel like you're a brave explorer or hero or conqueror. In more recent years, fantasy games have been butchered. They have been made to be ultra-safe HR room slop, where nothing actually foreign is utilized. New species talk like humans, they share the same moral framework, and have near identical social norms.
Thanks to Tosh.
That's why we recruited her.
Actually, Tosh uses them for themselves now.
They asked us to let folks know, so now you do.
Where we used to have distinct civilizations with real cultural tension and real differences in value systems. Now we get everyone coexisting with minimal conflict between the groups, or conflict that is heavily simplified, all in an effort to push some type of anti-racism message. Except, it harms the immersion of the game. It doesn't matter who you are or what you look like, you have faced discrimination in your lifetime. It is fundamental to the human experience, and something that will never disappear. So the hesitation to show it in media does not just shove blatant politics in your face, but it also just destroys the authenticity of the game world. Especially when it's not even just different races of humans, but different species altogether. You're telling me the majority of humans are treating the lizard people like their family? Give me a break. The thing is, gaming used to portray this, like the Khajiit, who are barred from entering cities in Skyrim because they are stereotyped for being thieves, or elves that are crafty and mischievous and are blamed for all of the world's problems. But that actually ties into something else. There are no evil races anymore. In times long gone, there used to be orcs and goblins who were just evil that you'd kill in these games. In this pursuit of globo-homo anti-racism messaging, that has been left in the past. You get stuff like in Hogwarts Legacy where they straight up have a #NotAllGoblins moment, where it's discovered not all of the goblins are evil.
Someone who knows Ranrock personally. They asked me not to mention their name to anyone.
A goblin? Tell me I'm wrong. You know goblins cursed my sister to shut her up. Said she should be seen and not heard.
I do, but not all goblins are...
Not all goblins what? Have you forgotten, Feldcroft? Have you forgotten the mine we just went through?
No, Sebastian, I haven't. You're not listening to me.
Why would I listen to someone so ignorant?
The egalitarian stuff ruins the immersion of these games because it is not a realistic dynamic. People will always be more predisposed to stay with their own, which makes these multi-ethnic societies with humans, elves, and orcs living together in a utopia just fragmenting for believability. And before someone comes and says, well, it is fantasy, so anything can happen, there's a difference between fantasy and nonsense. Even when making a game that takes place in another plane of reality than our own, it still has to appeal to logic or sense. If it does not, the game world falls apart, and it is impossible to take the game seriously. There's a reason Skyrim stays in the conversation after almost 15 years after its initial release. It's not because there is egalitarian propaganda shoved in your face, it is because it is a gripping world and narrative with multifaceted dynamics and stories. And yes, in-game discrimination plays a huge role. In The Outer Worlds 2, made by Obsidian, it features an evil fascist faction called the Protectorate that rules and brainwashes people through mental refreshment. And not only is this faction centered around a woman and is incredibly diverse, as are all of the factions in this game, the game just does not allow you to join or side with them at all. Because God forbid someone wants to side with a politically incorrect faction that disagrees with the developer's opinions. And look, I'm not claiming that a developer can't display an ideology or that developers aren't even overwhelmingly left-wing. In fact, I'd wager that most are and have been leftist or progressive types. It's fine, and there are games where it does push a bias. But when it oversteps and starts explicitly shoving it down your throat or telling you what you should believe, that's when game immersion just shatters completely. BioShock is a game critiquing extreme capitalism, but can still be enjoyed and doesn't overtly push modern politics. Or even Fallout New Vegas with the ultra-progressive NCR that affords equal rights for everyone. Not just women or people of color, but also mutants. Or the female NCR ranger who beats all of the legionaries that went up against her in the arena bare-fisted while they had machetes. Or the Legion itself, who are obviously the chutted out bad guys who represent toxic masculinity. The difference between these two examples is that even though the Legion are portrayed as basic evil bad guys, the developers sprinkled in actual reasoning and motivation into their faction while also introducing flaws and fatal problems with the NCR that the Fallout show undoubtedly threatens to undo by oversimplifying the conflict to the NCR being vaguely problematic. On top of that, you are also allowed to align with the Legion. Contrast that to modern games where not only do these evil factions have no complexity or depth, and the good factions are a picture-perfect leftist utopia circle jerk, but on top of that, you are also not even allowed to join the evil factions in these games. This makes games feel insanely restrictive in one note. Not only do you have to align with these politically correct morals, but even the bad guys have diverse crowds of people of color and women because, they may be fascists, but even these fascists wouldn't stoop so low as to become bigots. Decision making and player choice has also been shafted in modern gaming. This kind of ties into the simplistic and inoffensive factions mentioned prior, but there are no tough or morally gray decisions anymore. Every game now has cookie-cutter good versus bad decisions and endings. No thought-provoking moments that make the gamer question the morality of the decision or give him pause before picking which direction he wants to go. Even in the small amount of games that do have conflicting options in modern gaming, it's usually the most obvious good choice and the most obvious bad choice. There's no effort put into player choice anymore. This in return also affects the stories of games, making them very uninspired and straightforward. Many of these games do not leave any room for interpretation, and people think this is a good thing. The neckbeard redditors who go, you have no media literacy, chud, are literally the developers in modern gaming. This shouldn't even need to be said, but games and stories thrive when there are conflicting moral dilemmas, freedom of player choice, and afforded room for interpretation. Not to say that there can never be a definitive interpretation, but why have modern games assumed that the player is too dumb to interpret the story without having it spelled out for him? And why are differing interpretations such a bad thing? Also, the handholding has to stop, or at least be dialed back. There are practically no unmarked quests, and even collectibles are marked on the map now. Instead of exploring the world and finding cool trinkets while doing so, you just go down a checklist collecting stuff that you're honestly never going to use. Ubisoft games are for sure the top perpetrator in this category. They place so much useless shit around the world space that it just gets the player to waste time. And I myself have fell into it many times, but I always come to the realization that these random things I've been collecting is a waste of time, and it's clear that people do not want this garbage in games. The most popular game in probably the past few years is Elden Ring, a game that does the opposite of handholding. They give you the basics and then kick you out of the door. In regards to difficulty, it feels like every year, games get more and more easy. I'm by no means advocating that every single game should be like Sekiro or another extremely challenging game. What I am saying is that if a game can be completed by a toddler and the intended audience is not toddlers, you might have a problem there. No one wants to mindlessly play a narrative game, or any game most of the time, that is brain dead easy. The obvious tooltips, the yellow paint, and the journalist difficulty sliders. Gaming would drastically improve if developers made their game and balanced it around one difficulty that the game was intended to be played in, instead of having 50 different difficulties tailored to different types of people. Another thing that plagues the modern soulless game industry is the mass population of nameless NPCs. In the past, gamers would look on and fantasize about massive games filled with hundreds or thousands of NPCs, all walking around, and marveled at the grandeur of an alive and budding world. In reality though, it does the opposite. Games like Starfield, which introduce massive crowds of randomly generated nameless NPCs that have nothing but a few generic lines to say on repeat, makes the game feel less alive, and also makes it extremely hard to find NPCs who actually have something to say or quests to give. Not to mention how ugly all of them are, which I will talk about in a minute. Ironically, the console limitations of the past that made it impossible to flood games with thousands of NPCs was a blessing in disguise. Now in a game like Starfield, you feel like the only real person in a world full of soulless normies all saying the same few dialogues. So actually, pretty true to real life. The game world actually feels more confined and small because you are encouraged to not explore or search for NPCs because most of them have nothing of value to say. Not to mention that immersion is totally destroyed from this as well. It really just makes games feel more gamey, which is not something you want with most games. All of the dialogue at this point feels soulless, and like it went through HR first.
Watson, where are you with my apple fritters? I'm starving, and
Jonah? Kiss my ass. I quit.
Watson!
You're so cool.
It's quite literally unbearable. Not to mention the marvelization of games. Every game is littered with unfunny Marvel tier comedy. Just as the film industry was subverted by easy to please audiences, so too is gaming. Speaking of the film industry, it is leaking into and has taken over gaming. Movie games are ever so prevalent now to the point where practically 90% of new games are movie games. For those unfamiliar with the term, which I'm sure is not most, a movie game is a game that relies too heavily on cutscenes or narratives rather than gameplay. Examples of movie games are the Last of Us games, the new God of War games, and Uncharted, among others. And before someone goes into the comments and types a paragraph saying, I don't appreciate narratives and I'm just low IQ for wanting games to be games, I'm not saying every game or even the majority should be arcade shooters or mindless hack and slashes. Back in the 2000s to probably the mid-2010s, we got games that had very fleshed out, interesting, and unique stories, without those games sacrificing gameplay. In those games, you used to be challenged, and upon overcoming that challenge, became stronger. It was a power fantasy that felt like you achieved that strength upgrade. There were options where you could directly influence where the story went and the outcomes of it. Now you basically sit back, kill 5 enemies with the same uninspired and same combat mechanics, and then watch a 10-minute cutscene and repeat for 20 hours. And even the parts that you do actually get to play the game, it treats the player like they're retarded. Modern games are afraid to actually challenge the player with anything. They guide you through it, characters solve puzzles for you, and dialogue is non-stop. Now compare that to the extreme opposite end, like Dark Souls. FromSoft doesn't care if you struggle, if you're confused, lost, or stuck on a boss for hours. And when you solve or win a fight, it is because you figured it out. You didn't just watch a cutscene of your character winning or figuring out a puzzle, you won. FromSoft is not worried about formulating their games around the masses of normies, and that's where modern gaming has lost its soul. Games used to be made as a kind of art. Each game wasn't for everyone, and they trusted the player to figure things out, and if they didn't, then that was fine with developers because that wasn't the audience they were appealing to. Now every gaming studio appeals to the cookie-cutter Last of Us mechanics with movies in between the 5-minute combat sections. The gaming part of games is being phased out of gaming for people who don't even like playing video games. On the topic of The Last of Us, as that game kind of made way for this, but photorealistic graphics are killing gaming. I know some of you are thinking, he's saying a technological step forward in graphics is a bad thing? And well, yes, I am actually, and here's why. First, I'll just say, the point of games are to escape reality. When you play a game, or at least most of you, it's to do stuff you cannot do in real life, or to explore worlds that are not your own. Actual gamers don't play games to simulate reality, they play games to play games. So this is a near pointless addition to gaming that negatively affects the time spent on gameplay and narrative. Not to mention that art style trumps graphical fidelity 10 times out of 10. And I don't think this needs to be said, but I'll say it anyway. Photorealism is the ultra-realistic graphics. I'm not saying graphical fidelity should be totally forgotten about. I'm saying it shouldn't be a big focal point. One of the few games where graphical fidelity is good is in Rockstar titles. And kind of off topic and an unpopular opinion, but I don't think GTA 6 is going to be as good as previous entries. I will be buying it and making a video review on it if it ever comes out. My point is that in modern day, graphical fidelity feels like it takes center stage for developers and it negatively impacts all other aspects of the game. Not to mention the hardware problem, since every new game wants to look more realistic than the last, so you can't actually play it unless you're on a NASA supercomputer. I also touched on this in my video on AI, but this actually has the same effect as AI does on gaming. Every game that focuses on photorealistic graphics looks the same as each other. It kills originality and uniqueness. This part might ruffle a few feathers.
This is where the fun begins.
In reference to Western games, everyone and everything in them, specifically women, have been totally uglified. In addition to that fact, the male characters are emasculated, while the ugly-ass female characters act like men and take the place of the male characters. I could practically make a whole video about this with how prevalent it is, but I'll keep it brief as I show examples on screen. Abby from The Last of Us 2, steroided out giant who bludgeons the main male character from the previous game to death. Zendara, who is another strongman character archetype from the Immortals of Avian. Seer from the Jedi games, whose actor is in everything for some reason. I swear I can't escape this woman. She's in every game, movie, and TV show. Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn, which I'm sure you all already heard enough about way back when this game first came out. MJ's redesign from Spider-Man 1 PS4 to Spider-Man 2. Like, what is the point in doing this to her? And finally, the Forspoken girl, who literally has a good-looking actor, but they decided to fugly her in the game. And a couple others that I'll throw up on screen now. It's almost like the developers themselves are troons and are making the women in video games ugly so they can validate their life choices and make the women look like them instead of actual women.
Cross-dressing freak!
Something that you will also notice if you play games that were made in the past 6 to 8 years, the male characters are still conventionally attractive. All of the male characters have six-packs and have roided out muscles. So why is that? Because they don't want to appeal to men anymore. And if you don't know who the they is, go research who runs the massive companies behind publishing studios.
Do research.
Or the companies that pay to push overt globo-homo politics in video games, like Sweet Baby Inc. And on the topic of Sweet Baby Inc., let's talk about Tifa from the Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I know what you're going to say. She's still hot, so what is the point in bringing up this character specifically? Well, it's because it is a prime example of this type of censorship in action. In the remake, they made her, let's just say, proportions smaller and covered her up completely. Okay, kind of gay, but it's not that big of a deal, right? Wrong. A developer came out and explicitly said that they made her proportions smaller and covered her up more to comply with requests from the ethics department. But I guess the ethics department took no issue with 50-year-old Leon looking 30 with his skin-tight shirt showing off his abs and muscles. It is a literal establishment-backed uglification of women in video games. The people that run cover for this blatant desecration of beauty in video games are hypocrites in and of themselves. They'll tweet out calling a person complaining about ugly women being everywhere in gaming an incel, and then 5 minutes later post a tweet salivating over Leon Kennedy.
I mean, I'm literally saying right there, on the sidewalk, in the rain, in the car, on the street, in the traffic, in front of the moving cars, anywhere, at any time, at any place of his choosing. Lordy Lord! I don't even know what happened the past minute. My mind shut off the past minute. What just happened?
They claim it's realistic and the average woman looks like this, which is complete nonsense to anyone who has eyes. Games are a male-dominated space and should be made for men first and foremost, and even besides that, there is an obvious double standard. Remakes are the pinnacle of uninspired and unoriginal slop. The whole idea around remakes breeds complacency instead of innovation. Re-releasing the same game over and over again but removing the bits of charm that it made it special in order to appeal to the mainstream audiences, like the Resident Evil 4 remake that removed a lot of the old sections and iconic lines from the original.
No thanks, bro.
Or the Silent Hill 2 remake, which totally butchered the tone of the original game. And yes, I know the "but you don't want other people to experience the games you grew up with" argument. And to be frank, if they can't boot up the game in its original untampered with form because they couldn't give a damn about the game, then no, I don't. And besides that, it is destroying gaming. Studios just pump out remakes like it's candy instead of taking risks. because people buy out the remakes. It's a low risk and high reward scheme that also leaks into the community, where people who are not fans of the original games take over the fandoms and start grandstanding over the real fans, telling them that they're not true fans for not liking the remake. This happens with other medias too, of course, like the Fallout TV show. The Last of Us was released in June 14th, 2013, got remastered in July 29th of 2014. That's a year and 1 month later from the initial release. And then it got remade in 2022, despite not needing a remake at all. And yep, you best believe you have to pay $60 for it every time. Or what about Spider-Man for the PS4 getting remastered only 4 years after release? What the hell did they even change? It's quite frankly ridiculous. Soulless cash grabs that rely on nostalgia. Oh, and also you'll have to buy the DLCs again for the remakes too. The older you get, the more you realize the gatekeepers weren't just evil assholes that didn't want others to have fun. They were just holding the line to prevent the brain-dead normie population from flooding gaming and ruining everything. But now that gaming is hijacked and overrun with normies who will buy any overtly propagandized game that looks remotely fun, it will never get better. The days of escaping your miserable life into a fictional world is over, because they want you to remain miserable and have to shove modern politics down your throat no matter where you go. And before anyone comments this, no, I will not play indie games because they have the same problem as AAA games. Hope you guys enjoyed this video despite the black-pilled ending, but who knows, maybe it will get better. But until then, keep playing old games. Regardless though, thanks so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe if you feel like doing so. I have memberships for $1 a month, but that is all for today. And remember, don't you dare go hollow.